Dr. Holton, check your email.
Okay. Welcome to the third session in the district strand. It is building the continuum, supporting the work of all tiers across the district. And we're excited to have representatives, leaders in the field, honestly, from Millard Public Schools and Center School District. And we'll hear more about them and who they are throughout this session. But I want to get us oriented to set us up for success in our learning. If you've attended the previous sessions, you might have seen this matrix before. Some things that we might want to particularly pay attention to at sort of the end of the day is that we are taking care of ourselves by taking stretch breaks if we need to, making sure we have some water, and be aware of our stress level if we've attended this content in sequence. And we'd invite you to engage in productive dialogue. I've had the privilege of attending the previous two sessions, and the strength comes from the conversation of the participants. So we invite you to post your questions, because if you have a question, I am sure many more are wondering those same things. So those are some of the expectations that we think will support your learning in our time together. The other part that we want to pay attention to so that you can be engaged is connect to the chat and polls in Pathables, because that's where we will pull sort of questions and answers. If you want to talk to other participants throughout this session, go ahead and talk to them in chat. If you have questions for the presenters, go ahead and put that in polls. We'll monitor both. Wherever they end up, we'll be happy to answer. We know that it can be a little tricky. You might click on a link and then accidentally get out of Pathables. We just invite you to go back where you are to start and rejoin the meeting. And if that isn't working for you, feel free to contact the help desk. They are super supportive, and they'll be happy to get you back connected to this session if you run into any issues. So before we introduce each other, we want to talk about our intended outcomes for this next hour and 15 minutes. We are inviting you to discover the steps to build sustainability across all the tiers, to explore strategies and lessons learned from our model demonstration districts, and that's where most of our time will be spent, and identify solutions to possible challenges that you might bring back to your team. And to get us started, I'd introduce myself. My name is Lisa Powers, and I'm part of the MU Center. I'm a senior research associate there. And I'm accompanied here by two of my colleagues, Dr. Kelsey Morris, who's a content facilitator, and Dr. Tricia Guffey. And you will see them in chat, and they might even appear on the screen every now and then. But I do want to give them credit and some acknowledgement for the work they've done connected to this session. You're going to see some of the training materials we use with the DSFI and some of the quick tips, and I want you to know that they were part of the developers in that work. What we're super excited about is our actual presenters from our exemplars and districts. So we have Dr. Stacey King from Center School District, and she's going to tell a little bit more about herself and her district and her work in PBIS in a minute. And we're accompanied by two presenters from Millard School District. We have Dr. Carrie and Dr. Terry Holton from Millard. What we'd like you to think about, they're waving and saying hi, what we'd like you to think about is, how do you learn? And there is going to be a lot of information on this slide. There's going to be a lot of words that are here just as a reference for you. What we'd invite you to do is have a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, water, whatever you do, have a place to either scribble or take notes, because when we end this session, what we'd like you to do is think of one item, tip, idea that you will bring back to your team to action on this year. So you'll get a lot of things to explore, but what's one actual next step that you might share back with your team? So we'll kind of end with that after this hour and 15 minutes. So with that, I'm going to stop for a minute and ask Stacey to introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. As was shared, my name is Stacey King, and I am the Director of Family and Student Services. And so for my fellow directors of Family and Student Services, you know that is a catch-all for most anything that doesn't directly relate with curriculum and instruction. So I have the opportunity to support our counselors and behavior interventionists, our social workers, residency, things of that sort. But I consider my greatest task is that being the champion of the work of PBIS proactively to respond in supporting the students being successful behaviorally. That's a little bit about myself. In terms of the district that I am proud to represent, Center School District is a small school district that is in the southern Kansas City, Missouri area. As you can see by the map, we are surrounded by some bigger districts and oftentimes get kind of lumped in with either Casey Public to our north or Hickman Mills or Grandview to our south, but we are an entity all to ourselves. We have 8 schools that serve about 2,500 students. If you'd like to go to the next slide. We have an early childhood center for elementary schools, an alternative school, middle school, and high school. As I mentioned, we serve about 2,700 students. And you can see the demographics there, 62% minority, 54% free and reduced lunch. 13% of our students are identified as having some type of disability. And we have approximately 500 staff members, both certified and classified.
Thank you, Stacey. And so now Carrie and Terry will introduce themselves and their district.
Here we go. Sorry about that, everyone. Hi, I'm Carrie Novotny-Bus. I coordinate elementary special education for Millard Public Schools and also serve as our lead administrator on our MTSS behavior and academic systems. And so I have served as an elementary principal, a special education teacher, and my current role I love because it's brought me back to my passion and purpose as entering education, really wanting to make a difference and change for students with disabilities. And so I feel like I'm in the right spot and I get to serve in an incredible district that I've called home for 26 years now. I keep saying that I was brought up in Millard Public Schools and I'm just thankful for that. So my partner next door, actually, if I turn my camera right next door to me, is Dr. Terry Holton. So I'll turn it over to him and then we'll tell you a little bit about our district.
Dr. Terry Holton, I'm the Director of Special Education for the district and been an administrator involved with the development of MTSS academics and behaviors for the last about 15 years. Also was an elementary principal and have been the director for 9 years. So I'll let Carrie talk a little bit about Millard and who we are.
Awesome. So Millard is located in a suburb of Omaha, Nebraska, so right smack dab about in the middle of our nation. The population in Omaha in general is about 480,000 people. And so we are a school district that has 35 buildings, so 25 elementary schools, 6 middle schools, 3 traditional high schools, an alternative high school. We also have birth to 3 and preschool programming and our 18 to 21-year-old program that we call our young adult program. We serve about 24,000 students and have about 1,400 staff, 1,400 teachers on staff. So when you think a little bit about our demographics a little bit more closely, about 24% of our students identify as being a minority, 3% of our students, which is a growing population for us right now, identify as an English learner. 34% of our students are identified as gifted, and 25% of our families report living in poverty. We have about 13% of our students who are identified as receiving special education services in a variety of areas. Terry, would you want to add anything more about us?
No, that sounds great, Karen. Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks for sharing about a little bit about both your districts. We're excited to have you, both districts here, as one is a larger district and one is a smaller district. And we invite our participants to think about how have you both gotten on this journey of installing PBS within your district, within the context in which you serve, and what are some of the common variables and features that they might take away and apply in their district. So we're excited to have this conversation. I can testify in the planning meetings. I could listen to the three of these folks talk all day. So most of the time will be spent listening to them. We do want to reference that we are going to be connecting this conversation to the DSFI, which if you want more information about this, Kelsey talked about it in session 1. And you were given information around leadership teaming in session 1. If you didn't get a chance to see that, we invite you to go back and check that out. And then Heather talked about evaluation and policy. Today, we're really going to focus on training and coaching. I would invite you to listen to the previous sessions if you hadn't had a chance, because you'll see all these features are interconnected. And so while they might have talked about evaluation, they also talked about how did that lead to good training and coaching. And you will hear the same thing from Stacey, Carrie, and Terry, in that when we're talking about training and coaching, they may reference some of these features as well. We're really going to hone in on 3 particular features in training and 2 in coaching to narrow the conversation. So that we're not here all night, but that they're really highlighting the important things that they've implemented in their district. We also want to highlight, Kelsey talked about this, there will be training materials soon with the DSFI. We're going to give you a sneak peek today on what that might look like, because we're going to use that to guide our conversation. So the first thing we want to highlight is the importance of linking training and coaching. So we are going to talk about these in segments here, but we really want you to start thinking about how do these things interconnect, because we know we need the on-site technical assistance and coaching support to ensure training is going to have an impact. And we want to think about training across your workforce. As you think about it, district-wide, statewide, district-wide, schools, school teams, and individual teachers, to where you can then have an impact for students. And we're thinking about the systems, data, and practices that will be incorporated in training. Another resource that we have linked in the Pathables as well is the PD Blueprint. So if you want detailed information in addition to what's being shared today, this is a resource that could guide your team. So the first topic that we're going to talk about is district professional development plan. How did these 2 districts create a district professional development plan? And the big ideas that were the main point that they're going to bring us back to is how did they connect this plan to be relevant across time, 3 to 5 years? How did it connect to data and their district goals? We want to model, we won't be showing this for every topic content, but we want to give you a glimpse as to what the resources will be for you connected to the DSFI training materials. In addition to the big idea that we just shared, we will have also created sort of a task sequence of quick checks that if you're going to create your 3 to 5 year plan, these are some things that we invite you to think about. And so Stacey, Carrie, and Terry thought of these questions as they began planning what they wanted to share with you today. So they thought, what is already existing in their PD plan? How did they use fidelity data to help drive the development of their plan? How did outcome data impact their professional development? How is it aligned to the district vision and mission? And how is it reviewed on a regular basis? And so with those quick checks or things to think about, I think Stacey, you're going to talk first about what did that look like in your school district?
Absolutely. You know, for the Center School District, for us, it really foundationally starts with our mission and vision. this past school year, we had the opportunity to go through our strategic planning process, which led first and foremost to the revision of our mission and vision. And there was a couple of things that were super intentional that have paved the way for the work that we are doing in the district. Number one, it was in the mission, the inclusive of both students and every staff member. And the idea that it's both of those two groups working collaboratively to demonstrate high achievement, character, and collaboration in a diverse community. The next piece around our mission and vision that foundationally has paved the way is really the idea of ensuring that each student is thriving in a future-focused learning environment. And as we all know, those soft skills play a huge part in this idea of a future-focused learning environment. And so from that came our strategic plan. And we actually have two goals that are currently driving the work that we are doing in the Center School District around supporting our students' behavior. The first is our goal number 2, which is really around eliminating our systematic biases and practices that affect the equitable access to education. Social emotional support, hiring, and finance. I will tell you, as a district, we have been identified by the state as being disproportionate in our rate of suspending African Americans with a disability for more than 10 days. And so it was super important to us that there was an intentional focus on this piece of the puzzle, recognizing that though we were identified for that smaller group within that 13% that I talked about earlier. But the reality is our general education data very much matches, at least up to this point, matches what is happening on the special education side. So goal number 2 is very important to us. The second goal that really drives our work is goal number 4, which is providing our school staff with alternatives to traditional behavior exclusionary practices. One of the things that we did is we looked at our data and we intentionally used the term traditional behavior exclusionary practices to be more inclusive of more than just out of school suspensions. Because students, anytime students were separated from their primary instruction, we wanted to capture that data and wanted to seek to provide alternatives to that.
Carrie, you want to talk a little bit about what it looks like in your district?
Carrie, you're on mute.
Good team member, Terry, helping her out. Or Terry might start.
I'll start and let Carrie get off. Oh, there she is. All right, there you go.
There I am. Okay, sorry about that. Stacey, thanks for sharing. There were so many things that you said that I was like, yes, and yes, and yes, like a lot of things. So I'll try not to echo it a lot. But when you, Lisa, if you can flip to slide 25 real quick, when we initially started to talk about it, we were talking a lot about the importance of focus, right? And systems development around this question. And so for me right away, what I started to think about was our district strategic plan. Our strategic plan for us has been kind of like that beacon or that guiding light that every 5 years, we engage community members, administrators, teachers in identifying, what are some of the challenges, what are some of the strengths that we have as a school district. And so that we've been doing that since 1990, which is actually the year I graduated from high school. So it's kind of funny because I remember sitting in on a board meeting and they were talking about the strategic plan when I was a senior in high school for civics. That's a long story and a long time ago, but You can see in the graphic that our strategic plan has been around since 1990. And so every 5 years or so, we identify what our threats, what our opportunities are, and that really drives our professional development. So if you look at it, you can see as you start to hit kind of the second iteration of our strategic plan, you start to see that there's some hints of, are we looking at more than just academics? Are we looking at the whole child? And are there some behavioral pieces happening, social, emotional, and the terms have changed over years, but definitely you can start to see a theme in each iteration of our strategic plan where PBIS, behavior, social emotional learning, and making sure that we have good systems in place to support the whole child as a learner and a little person or a big person has been really important to us. And again, that's what drives our professional development. So the next slide, on slide 26, is our most recent area that we are working on, which is our strategy that involves behavior and social emotional learning. And it's really kind of pushed us to take a look at systems. What do we have in place? Taking a look at staff. What do we have in place for students in schools? And so building the system out and then helping people with implementation has been the work we've been doing over the last 5 years. And we're kind of wrapping up our last iteration of our strategic plan. Terry, would you add anything else?
Yeah, I just think that people think that, oh my gosh, these two districts are so fortunate because this work is a part of their strategic plan. And I think that planting seeds with people along the way, but as you go through a strategic plan or however you develop your priorities as a school district is very, very important. And it all starts with looking at that data and looking at the concerns that are coming up and then finding those venues to voice those concerns. We went into strategic planning thinking that maybe behavior was going to show up, but we also provided some additional information to strategic planning team members about what was going on with behavior and the trends we were seeing. And lo and behold, a strategy shows up. And so I think a lot of people think, oh, they're so fortunate because they have it there. And I'm a district that doesn't have it there. And I think you can always be planting seeds and working with people to understand. And it starts with data. And it starts with starting to have that conversation about what you're worried about as a school district and what you think you should be addressing.
Well, thanks for sharing. So this is an opportunity for us to summarize and you to have a conversation together with Stacey. Thinking about what's one big idea and one tip around this topic at building a 3 to 5 year plan that you would want to leave with participants.
You know, I think, and Terry mentioned something that really spoke to me, and that is, whether you're fortunate enough to have this work embedded into your strategic plan or not, I think that data becomes a huge anchor for the work. And I think if there's one tip that I would provide, and is that whether it is tying it to your strategic plan or tying it to data that shows the direction that you're headed, that you're super intentional about always making that connection in all the work that you do through professional development. So, you know, and kind of in the spirit of the perceived, yet one more thing, or this is different from, I think when you're intentionally tying your work to what either your strategic plan or your data is telling you, I think it gives relevance to the planning, the professional development planning that you're doing, and ultimately what you're providing.
Thanks. Carrie or Terry, what would you recommend as a big idea and or tip?
I guess mine is always keep in mind that professional development is a continuous improvement process. I don't think our best laid plans over the last years have moved and changed depending on the input and what it is that we see we need. I think we all experienced that when COVID hit, right? Like your best laid plans sometimes can take a really sharp left or a really sharp right. And that's okay. And so, you get started, and always keep in mind that it's a continuous improvement process. You're always taking a look at what part of it's working and what's not working, keeping your vision in mind for professional development and where you want to be, but being flexible in that, depending on the needs and the implementation of what you're working on.
Mm-hmm. In the Center School District, I talk a lot about things being set in Jello. To your point,
Love it.
because I think there does have to be, you definitely want to have a sense of where you're headed, but it has to be flexible enough that you can move with what your data is really revealing to you and what your times are revealing to you. So yeah, I appreciate that.
So what I'm hearing is that data, along with your vision and mission, is a driver, and that be intentional about getting it in front of people so that they can make better decisions when they're making a strategic plan about how to include behavior, social, emotional as part of it. So our next topic is a little bit around how do you build your professional development plan and think about alignment. So how do you align training materials for social, emotional behavior? How are they aligned to the PBIS framework? And as before, we kind of work through this sort of task sequence on these quick checks to sort of get to our conversation today. So how do professional development plans depict the alignment of the training event with the larger PBIS implementation framework? How are you connecting these things together? And I think Millard is going to start first on this conversation.
Yeah, so I've been in this role for 4 years now. And when we first got started, Terry, there's kind of an inside joke in our district that's been going on for a long time, that if you're part of our RTI team or our MTSS team, which is really where we house a lot of the thought and intentionality around behavior, that it's like a life sentence. It's a life sentence that I love, by the way, because I love systems development. I love thinking about how it is what we do, how that impacts kids, and how we can impact professional development and 1,000 other things. But when we first got started, Terry and I talked a lot about, we kind of need to do a bit of a reset and have a conversation with our district level team about where things are at. And this is a graphic on this slide that we kind of stole from Nebraska MTSS around the importance of building your MTSS systems. So when you think about the foundation of what you have, including board policy, things I've heard all the way through the conference the last few days, think about what your foundation is, and then what systems do you have in place for academic, social, emotional, your core instruction. And then at the top of that, to kind of cap off your house, you've got what interventions that are in place. What do you have to support? And I think that was important for us to take a team back through that and really kind of recenter what is our MTSS process within Millard Public Schools. And start to look at some of the resources that we have to support the implementation in the districts themselves. One of our grounding pieces, though, if we flip to slide 31, has been our MTSS, what we call our flow chart. And I'm going to let Dr. Holton talk about that a little bit, because that's been foundational in the work that we've done around professional development internally.
We early on did not see MTSS, RTI as a pyramid piece. We saw it as decision-making points. And so we developed a flow chart because it's a process that you're working through, and you have decision points that you have to sit down around a table and have conversations about kids about, both academically and behaviorally, social, emotionally. So that graphic or visual is what we've always used to demonstrate that need to have those conversations. And so that definitely would drive a lot of our professional development, is trying to help people to have the resources available to them in a format that reminds them of the processes we want them to engage in. And I think that that is critical, that you not only think about what information you're disseminating to people through professional development, but how you're disseminating that information, does it actually involve the people in thinking about the processes either they want to build or they want to engage in as they move through it? And that was our our thoughts around the flow chart, the MTSS flow chart, and then we have supporting documentation that sits underneath, and we have thoughts around that documentation too. So really getting to that, we prompting people to guide them through the system and giving them indicators of where they move next and next steps really help people to start understanding how this was going to work, and then to start really strongly implementing it.
And it's been our framework. So it's what we use and it's what we connect back to all the time. And so that helps us with that internal implementation and professional development, because I always say, it just keeps getting better. Like we keep revising it, and not to a place of fault, but we make changes based on where we're at and what the needs are. So it's become pretty robust. What you see here is a graphic, and I know that we've attached in the link, we have a link to our MTSS website within our district website that is open for people to see. So if that's something that would be helpful, feel free to jump in and take a look at it. But this is kind of our anchor. Our process has been our anchor with this.
Nice. So the participants could look and see what your process looks like by going to your website, and having a common process allows for collaboration. And I think one of the things I've heard you talk about is schools going through that continuous improvement journey as well as you.
All of them, like honestly, all of them still are in different places. There's 35 buildings, and we would all wish they were all in the same place at the same time, with systems development and implementation and professional development around that within their building, but they're not. And so a lot of that has been meeting them where they're at and helping move them forward. That's systems coaching.
Nice.
Yeah.
So Stacey, I think you'd add to the conversation on what's happening in Center School District.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting, Carrie, when you show the visual of the house, prior to me coming into the role I'm in now, I served as principal of one of our 4 elementary schools. And at that point, we had 8 different houses. Everyone, those of us that have been around the district for a while looks back to those days of everyone kind of building their own system. And we really lacked continuity and real consistency that ran across all of our schools, despite our district being fairly small. And so this visual that you see on the screen represents initially when I came into this role in conjunction with our executive director of human resources, really starting to set the stage for our work by embracing the work of professional learning communities. What you see there represents the committees that most of our schools have in place and how they serve the school, whether that being a tier 1, a tier 2, or a tier 3 lens type of support in terms of how that particular team works and supporting students. And so on the next slide, you really see that snapshot of big picture what we are doing around our MTSS structure, and going from 8 houses that all kind of do their own thing, and we hope the students are getting a continuity of care, to really looking to define by tier the purposes of those teams, and what they would be using in terms of data and evidence to support the work of their teams, all lives on this slide, with a reminder of from a PLC approach, the actions that ensure that we're doing the right work, all caps on right, and then the 4 questions that guide our work around what do we want students to learn, how will we know they learned it, what do we do for students that get it, and what do we do for students that don't.
So thanks for sharing your alignment processes. This is an opportunity for you both to have a conversation again on what would be one big idea or one tip you would want to leave with your participants around this topic.
I think for the Center School District, it's the idea that collaboration is key. I have a counterpart that obviously supports our academic, the work we do on the academic side of the aisle. But we made an intentional commitment to wanting to present our work as one system. It's not systems, plural of support. It is one system that supports both academics and behavior, but that requires a lot of collaboration and interaction between my department and our academic services department.
Yeah, I would, collaboration is key. And for me, especially, like, I know that we wouldn't be as far along as we are right now if we weren't good listeners to the buildings that we serve at the district level about what works and what's not working, and what are the priorities and focus. And I think the other part is just, again, I'll reiterate, everybody is in a different place. Sometimes there's a new administrator that started in a building that had great systems, and they're not as great of a systems leader, right? Or you have a building who was struggling with systems, and now they have, new interventionists that come in that have some ideas about it. And I'll reiterate again, a lot of it is meeting people where they're at, having a good understanding of what your process and systems are in your district, and then helping coach people towards that vision, but also staying open and listening. Dr. Holton, would you add anything else?
Yeah, I think that as Lisa pointed out, we're the larger district in this presentation, and Stacey's really a smaller district, and it's hard, that span of control across 35 buildings. And so really, we have always looked at this work as providing a backbone for our buildings to attach to. I always use the bowling analogy. I love when those bumpers pull up on the sides of a bowling alley, so my ball doesn't go in a gutter, it goes down and hits the pins. And so we're those bumpers at the district level, but then we have to give buildings space in between those bumpers to create, because they understand their local context, they understand their student population, they understand their students, they understand where they are in their professional development journey. So you've got to have a robust enough district process, but you also got to be thinking, how do I allow people at the building level to create within this system too, and encouraging that work and those efforts by them. So I think that some people try to get really tight when they implement MTSS, and I would encourage you to think about giving people the support, encouraging the conversations, but backing away and allowing some of your buildings to create then with the information that you provided them.
That's the question we often get. How tight or how loose should this be? And you're offering us to think about, put a good system in place and then allow them to create for their context. Nice. So this last area in professional development is going to be a perkier conversation, and it's going to be around internal professional development. How do you grow people internally to provide professional development? And this is a little bit about investing and relying on an internal core group of trainers and that aids sustainability, increases relevance, contextual fit, and enhances alignment. So we know if this is the big idea, what has your district done to help make that happen? And here are some quick checks or some prompts that others can go back and look at. One of the things we just want to highlight is in the PD Blueprint, there is a trainer's coach's self-assessment. That's one way many districts have used to kind of figure out where are we starting from. But with that, we'll learn from Stacey, Terry, and Carrie, how did their district do this?
Big question, but it's lovely. Stacey, are you okay if I jump in?
Please.
Okay. So the question that you asked, there's a couple of things that I think about, and part of that I will say is we partnered with Dr. Lewis over many years now, and he has served as a great coach for us to continue to think about systems development, right? It's pretty easy to get down in the weeds with schools when things are difficult. but we've continued to work with Dr. Lewis at all levels, elementary, middle, and high school, to kind of help us, to coach us in our systems development so that we can continue to help coach buildings as well. And I think that's been really important for us. Out of that work, we still identified a need though. And one of our needs were we have incredible counselors, psychologists, and social workers in each one of our buildings. And we also have great administrators in our buildings as well. And they're all supporting behavior, possibly from a different lens in their day-to-day work, right? All of them have their areas of expertise. So one of the challenges and opportunities that we saw was how do we bring this group of people who have the most expertise around behavior and mental health within our district together to work together and problem solve, and support the needs of individual students or small groups of students, but also to help us with the systems development in each one of the buildings to continue to move things forward. When you think about that process or flow chart we shared earlier, how do you get systems in place for that? And so that's been like, that's where I initially go with the question. Is that's been big work, but it's been good work, and we're not there yet. We haven't arrived. We still continue to work on that with our behavior coaches. But I'll let Terry and Stacey jump in a little bit.
I would agree with Carrie. I mean, the philosophy we've always taken is, we have the people inside of our district, and again, we have the luxury that we're a little bit bigger, but to solve a lot of problems. And then it's just getting the right people around the table to have the right conversations. And so I think that's an important piece when you're doing this work, to step back and think about who are the right people to put at the table to have the right conversations to move this work forward. And we know in our buildings that, we have some educators with some great experiences around behavior, but we definitely have some great counselors, school psychs and social workers and administrators that have good, strong knowledge around behavior. So if we're not engaging those people in the conversation and having those people help us move this forward, then we're not probably doing this work right. Dr. Lewis, I remember having a conversation early on because everybody can always have more school psychs and counselors. I mean, and that's often what you hear from building principals. We need more of these. And Dr. Lewis told me early on, you guys have enough. You guys have enough to start this work and do this work well. And I think just that reassurance to, we're identifying the right people to start this work and have the right conversations, it was a big deal. And it's just blossomed from there. Like Carrie said, we haven't arrived, but we're a continuous improvement model. So you don't arrive in continuous improvement models. You just keep on continuously improving, right? Mm-hmm. And we know just as long as we're moving forward, taking steps forward, we're doing what we're supposed to do. So that's kind of how we've looked at this piece from a Millard standpoint.
I think our joke, as we have talked, together over the last weeks as we've been developing this, is it goes back to that saying, when you know better, do better. Yeah. And so as we worked through it, we continue to look at what's working, what's not working, and when we know better, we do better.
Absolutely. Not to be redundant, because really, I don't know that I could say it any better than Carrie and Terry did. For the Center School District, Dr. Guffey was our Dr. Lewis, in that she has been someone that has walked alongside of us as a, in the spirit of coaching the coaches, has really been instrumental in helping to develop us with this idea. Like you all said, it's our collective wisdom that is going to get us there, and making sure that we have representation that doesn't necessarily sound like or iterate all the time the same information maybe that I would be iterating, because I think it's in that diversion of thinking that we really get to the best version of the work that we're doing. One of the other things, and then I will be quiet, that's really important for the Center School District as we bring individuals on board to do the work of the Center School District, is really starting at onboarding having an intentional focus on rounding all that come into our system in terms of how we do business in the Center School District. That starts from the first day on the job to unify all of the various experiences and what have you around our collective mission in the district.
So thanks for sharing your expertise on this topic. This is probably the question we hear most out in the field, is how do you build internal coaches? And what you're inviting us to think about is get a thought partner, someone that can prompt and work with you, and then look internally, who are your expertise within the district, and bring them together and build them. And that may be the one tip that people can really take away. It's a theme that I also heard in the leadership strand with Kelsey this earlier today as well. Get the people around the table and give them the structures and systems to do the work, and then we'll move it forward. So we have an opportunity here. We're finished with the professional learning section, and we have an opportunity to check in with Dr. Guffey. If there are any questions that the three folks could answer, this is our break time for that.
We do actually have a question that has come in through chat, and it is for Stacey, but I'd also like to hear from Carrie and Terry as far as what it looks like within their districts. And the question is, and I quote, "It looks like you have separate tier 1 teams as far as attendance, behavior, PBIS, but one data team for tier 2. Is that correct? And does your tier 2 team look at academics and behavior?" So if each of you could maybe kind of identify what those teams look at, who they're made up of, that kind of might help provide some clarity.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. At the tier 1 level, we do have separate teams that look foundationally, when we're thinking about what we're guaranteeing to all, we have separate teams that are looking at that work. And so there is a separate academic team, different from behavior team, that's really foundationally putting in those tier 1 practices around PBIS, and even a different attendance team. But I'll be honest with you, is when we get to the tier 2 level, that all of those, all of that comes into one space, because as we all know, oftentimes it's rarely just an attendance problem, or just a behavior problem, or just an academic problem. There's an interplay between those three that is vital, that we recognize as we're identifying evidence-based interventions to support that student, and really looking to identify maybe some causality or hypothesizing causality around which is inspiring challenges in some of the other areas. So whereas at the tier 1 all level, we have separate teaming, we do at the tier 2 and at the tier 3 level, those teams look at all facets of the whole child.
Nice. Carrie and Terry, what would you add?
Yeah, I would say ours goes back to the flow chart piece of it. Where from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3, what we're looking at, and then the movement back and forth in that. We've always, historically in this district, have centered around a problem-solving model. And so at each one of the levels, each one of the schools, a common language of what problem solving involves is important. And also in a district of having as many buildings as we do, they all call it a little bit something different. And so they'll talk a little bit about, their behavior data team, or their academic data team, or their problem solving team. And you really get a good sense that they're problem solving teams, that they're looking at data, they're having conversations about kids, what's working, what's not working, as part of their PLCs and their problem-solving process within the building. Millard has what we call Policy 10,000. And so there's some district level parameters, like things that you can expect from district level supports and systems and leadership. And then what are some of those building pieces that buildings make decisions on? It's their autonomy as a building in a small community, within a larger one, of what works for them within, like Terry said, within the bumpers. So those are a couple of things that come to mind for me.
Yeah, Tricia, I love this question because, and keep these type of questions coming, because there's no right answer to this question. So I love answering questions where there's no right answer to the question. I've seen buildings do it both ways very successfully. I love Stacey's term interplay. You need interplay between those teams. So some way that those teams are not just working in, the Nebraska term for this is a silo, or I think the national term is isolation. You don't have teams working in isolation or in silos, but there's interplay between those teams. But I've seen buildings put this together in a variety of different ways, very, very successful. And so again, this is something that we guide on and we guide around. Don't work in silos, make sure there's interplay, make sure there's common people on each of those teams, but the makeup of those teams might look a little bit different. And then we're going to leave that to that building principal to make a lot of decisions around that, but that we're not going to make it, it's not negotiable whether there's teams meeting to problem solve around kids and data around kids. I'm not saying that that's negotiable, but the makeup of those teams, we're going to leave it a little bit to that site to determine it. And I think that bringing those people in and giving as much ownership to your buildings as you possibly can just puts more people in making the process better. And so if they have ownership and made that decision and that they're going to do it that way, they're probably going to follow through with it than sitting there disagreeing with the way the district's indicating they should do it. So great question. I've seen it done, like I said, very successfully both ways.
So what's key to think about is that there's data at the table and that they work cross teams in some capacity, and how they do it might differ, but they're communicating, and to use the Nebraska term, not working in silos. I love that. Okay, so we're going to switch gears. We have two more topics, and this is around coaching and technical assistance. So the big idea here is, how do you organize materials and information so everybody across your districts knows what to do, why to do it, when to do it, how to do it. So how do you organize it so that you're communicating clearly? And then we had worked through some quick checks to help guide this conversation as well. I'll just pull out one to get us started. Are the materials organized so that they're readily available for all internal stakeholders with clear indicators of relevance? Or you could pick any other question that speaks to you, but I think we're going to hear from Millard first on this one.
Sure. If you have the possibility to pull up our district website, I'd like to show that a little bit, just so that you can kind of see how we have organized our materials so that they're accessible to everyone. So whether you're a district level leader, or your building administrator, teacher, regardless of what your seat is on that problem solving team or within the school building, we have worked hard to put resources together so that they can be at people's fingertips when they need them, which I think is important. Like, if you've got resources in front of you, it does make it a little bit easier to get the job done. So once you get there.
Is it not showing?
It probably is. I'm having a little bit of difficulty with technology on my side. Nope, you've got it.
Lisa, you got it.
Okay, thanks.
So for each one of the areas on our initial page, we have it organized. So we've got our early childhood, then we've got elementary, middle school, high school. And then once you click into behavior, you'll see that flow charts there again, right? So Lisa, if you scroll up, this is kind of our anchoring document, our anchoring process. Now, the smart guy that's here, when I first started in this role, said, wouldn't it be awesome if we could just make it so when they're talking about tier 1 or tier 2, that they can just click on the flow chart and they can get there? Well, that's there and it's accessible for our teams. However, we also have buttons up top too. So for our tier 2 processes, if you wanted to click on one of them, what we've done is our MTSS process that we have and system that we have is laid out there for our teams really well. And then there's some accompanying documents that are there, some clarification pieces that are helpful. You know, the roles of each one of the team members at that tier, that's helpful. Take a look at fidelity, data collection. So for each one of those, we've provided some guiding statements, guiding resources for them. And this wasn't a one-person show. So this was done over time with lots of input. And so it's collective and collaborative thought over a lot of time. And so we have that for each one of the tiers. We have that for tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So you can kind of see that. It's really helped us. I think it's given our teams and our buildings something to go back to as they're developing systems within their own building and what works for them. The other part that's there too is our parent communication pieces. I think that's important whenever a child is struggling, that it's not a, oh, sorry about that. You should have access to that. But when a child is struggling, that we have, it's more than just the school team, you know, involving the parents in that problem solving process and conversation and planning is important as well. So that link, which I'll get that open up for people to see, is what we provide to parents when a child is part of our MTSS process. We'll talk a little bit later about the behavior toolkit. I think it'll come up better in a different place, but we'll share that too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stacey, you want to add? A center?
Sure. And I will be brief on this piece. For the Center School District, particularly going into the 21-22 school year and coming off of all that has happened tied with the C word. One of the things that was super important is that we regrounded ourselves in what we are committed to doing as a district. And so this document really represents our beliefs around students, what students need to be behavior successfully, around building a community of learners, providing alternatives to traditional behavior exclusionary practices, having a restorative approach, teaching in the same way we teach on the academic side, so on and so forth. This foundationally, if you want to go to the next slide, and we don't need to go, we don't have to go into my link, though it will be available for those to see. You don't have to go to it. Foundationally represents our MTSS manual, which is how we have organized in the same way that Carrie just described. It really provides that structure, including links that takes teams to various resources and what have you. But it just provides a toolkit, if you will, of as they're moving from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3. We talk about it in terms of tight and loose. What is in the manual represents pieces of the puzzle that we would like for our schools to have in place. But there's a lot of latitude that's grounded in their community and what works best in their school that becomes the loose part of this work. I love that analogy of the bumpers with when you're bowling, because the hope is that that's what this manual provides. All of our schools have a folder where a Google folder where they keep their data and they keep the reflection of their meetings and things of that sort, so it's easily accessible, that they can go to and check in, and that's all a part of this process as well.
Carrie, I think this is about your toolkit. Do you want to speak to that here, or?
Yeah, we can. One of the things I kind of wanted to share was, you always get to a point where there's a concept called moral imagination. And whenever you're visioning about something, moral imagination is a process. But it was something that I kind of did myself in this role to figure out what our next steps are. And part of it was identifying what are our blind spots, you know, what are the parts that we're missing? And it connected really well. When again, moving into this role and having conversations with Dr. Holton, we got to the point where we said, okay, we've hit a place where we're going to need to branch out a little bit more. We're going to need to ask for some additional, see if there are additional partners around this area. What are we missing? What's our blind spot? And one of those was that, you know, we're really good at school, but we aren't always the academic side, but we're not always the experts, even though we've got people who have a lot of training and experience in that way. Our counselors, psychs, and social workers, we were at a place of saying, okay, what else do we need to be thinking about? And so I think it's always important, and Stacey talked about this earlier, you know, you need thought partners, or maybe it was Terry, you need thought partners in this. And for us, we're going to share with you the behavior toolkit. I'm going to share that with you here if we can pull it up. But we started to partner with an outside organization, MHTTC, at the national level, and then within our regional level, to start to have some more conversations about behavior, mental health, and the development of our behavior coaches. So it's a blind spot, like, what don't we know? What else could we be thinking about? And this really has been, this behavior toolkit is also something that's available to all of our buildings. And was initially designed for our behavior coaches, our counselors, psych, social workers, and school administrators. And so this has been kind of a partnership with MHTTC in the work that we've done. It's been heavily driven by Dr. Lewis, because that's the systems development behind it, and lots of other awesome coaching from him. And then we started to put things together as a resource for our counselors, psych, social workers. And because teachers spend the majority of the time with kids on a day-to-day basis, that tier 1 is also a part of it as well. And so some additional resources for classroom teachers. It would take me, could spend 30 minutes talking to you about this, but want you to know that it's there for you to take a look at too, and maybe it would be helpful for you.
Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I think I'll start, and then you 2 or 3 jump in. One thing that I think I'm hearing as a big idea or tip is document your work so that you can grow and collaborate among all the different workforces. You are making this look beautiful and easy. My assumption or guess is that you've spent a lot of work and time to get here, and that you're representing a lot of people that put effort into creating sort of this documented system that you all work from.
Yeah, I kind of think about it like as a museum curator, right? You have all these great works of art, and then you have to start to curate it and figure out what are the pieces that people want to see, or in our lens as educators, what are the pieces that are going to be helpful for people. So we've developed things over many years, but now let's get it into a place where it's workable and it's a great resource for people.
Nice.
I would take it a step further, Lisa, and not only document, but we really have gone on a journey of giving it away. And I was a little leery about doing this in the beginning, but it has come back in spades to us, just making it all public facing, putting it all on our main website, the input we get from others, the conversations that it drives just from other people looking at our work and saying, have you thought about, how do you do? Then prompts more internal conversations. So I would not only tell you to document, but also document and give it away to others. And because it comes back in very thought-provoking conversations.
And I will say this, being on the other end of the spectrum, if you will, having the opportunity to learn and to engage with what other districts are doing, really you almost become another thought partner, if you will, via your resources when you're at the table. There are opportunities that a district like yours has had that quite honestly isn't necessarily available to a district my size in the same way. But when I can pull my team together and then pull up your work, it becomes a great point of, because there's no way I could just take what you're doing and just plop it on our website and say, okay, go forth. you know, but what it does do is it almost becomes, like I said, another thought partner via the words on the page or the links that are available that gets us thinking through our processes. So I appreciate your commitment to sharing with others.
I think that's in alignment with this whole conference. And this whole conference is about giving and getting from others, and we're collaborating and sharing across. So I think, Stacey, that's in the spirit of what we're all trying to do today. The last content topic that we're going to talk about is coaching. And how do you build coaching expertise aligned to your PD plan? And how have you identified individuals that maybe could serve as the function of could have the function of coaching? Might be one area you want to speak to start with. And I think this is Millard.
Yeah, this is really just more of our coaching vision for our counselors, psychs, and social workers. There's a couple of highlights there when you think about what our vision was. First of all, realizing that we have amazing resources. You know, people are our greatest resource in every single district that we work in, and understanding that our counselors, psych, social workers, and administrators actually work in complementary roles versus those silos or on their own. And so when we think about coaching and how is it that we bring people to the table to help kids and help with systems development, it's important. That's important to us, is to keep in mind who the people are that we have available as resources. So really this slide is just our coaching vision. And then we've got some articles there. One of them is a new direction for school counselors, psychologists, and social workers. And our director of student services shared this with our team within the last month or so. And it's just interesting about how the roles of counselors, psych, social workers, school administrators is shifting over time. So we put it there as a good read possibly for you. And then the other links I think we've already shared, our toolkit as well as our coaching framework. So Terry, anything you'd want to add there?
I have to do my commercial. So coaching is different than teaching, and we don't prepare our professionals in and around education to coach each other well. We just expect them to do it, that they're going to understand how to have professional conversations and impact each other. And I talk to the universities around us all the time about school psychs and helping them in their coursework to develop this ability to coach, and counselors and helping them to develop this ability to coach. So I really think this is a skill that is a very important skill if you're going to do this type of work, to helping people develop themselves into coaches and help them to have coaching conversations with others. And like I said, it's some people do it naturally, but others need help with it. And so I think it's something that we need to put more focus on in education and would make education stronger.
It's a skill to coaching. I often say an art and a science to it. Stacey, what would you add?
Absolutely. No, the only thing I completely co-sign on everything that's been said. And definitely would not want to repeat that. I agree with you, Terry, that this idea, it's one thing to have that bank of knowledge. It's another thing to share that and guide others in developing that knowledge in a way that empowers all. And so I agree 100% with you. I know as a district, we are, particularly a district our size, we are super fortunate in the fact that we have a counselor, a social worker, a behavior interventionist in all of our buildings, and obviously multiple buildings multiple positions at the secondary level. That is something that, at least in our area, isn't necessarily commonly seen. And so you would think, oh, that's amazing. But I think it's that idea of teaching them how to be coaches and what they bring to the table. That's where our challenge comes in, and that's where we have to be super intentional. And I know we've alluded to this throughout, some of the ways that we foundationally align all around the work that we're doing in our district, which is super important. But then there is that piece of the puzzle, Terry and Carrie, that you both shared around, and how do we guide others to the water in a way that empowers all. So
Yeah, and coaching is so people oriented, right?
Mhm.
Like the basis for coaching is you connect with people and there's a good rapport. But when you start working on skills, you're not coaching the person, like you're coaching the skill development. And for us, we really had to work through with coaching, and we still continue to work through it in some places, that coaching's not evaluative. It's, it's a thought partner. It's somebody walking alongside you. It's somebody who has a better understanding of facilitating a process to get people to engage in conversation and take steps forward. But that's difficult oftentimes, because people will see a coach as, I'm not doing something right. Well, if any of us were playing a sport, if you think about a sport or dance or whatever, debate, whatever it might be, your coach isn't there necessarily to evaluate you. Your coach is there to help you get better, like to grow you in what you're doing. And so the coaching part of it it can be tricky, but it's so beneficial when people start to see that it's not evaluative. It's more helping me grow skills professionally so that I can meet the needs of kids.
Perfect. So what I'd like to do as we wrap up today is to give you each a chance. We could have a longer session maybe next year, really on the art and science of coaching, because I think that could be a whole topic in itself. And you did link in the Florida systems coaching document, so that's there for participants as well. What we'd like to end with before we do questions is, if you were to think about this year and where you're going, what's something you're super proud of, and what's the next step you plan to take?
I will say for the Center School District, I think the one thing that I am super proud of is how laser focused we have gotten on responding to the data and making decisions for our district. When I first started in this role, we made a lot of shoot from the hip decisions that it made sense in our heart, but we didn't know necessarily that it matched what our data was saying. And I think we have really grown in that area. I think our stairs, our growth area is we are still working on developing a clear system of memorializing and documenting what we're doing. Being a small district, most of us are a jack of many trades. This work is a big piece of my job, but it's always one of only of many things that I do. And so getting it on paper so it doesn't live with the person continues to be our challenge.
I would say for us, three things came to mind really quickly. Our initial conversations around COVID recovery and our plan here in the district has centered around an article that's called Do Less Better. And Dr. Lewis shared that with us, and it really has been pivotal. And I'll tell you, it's something I'm very proud of, because we built systems over time. They may not be perfect. They may not be 100% implemented, right? But we're getting there. But our encouragement for our buildings has not been go out and recreate a bunch of new things. It's been lean back into the systems you've developed, improve the ones that you have, lean on those when you're concerned about behavior and mental health of students. So I've been really proud of that. I'm proud of the grace that's been extended across our district for each other and for students, just to be a little bit more mindful that everybody is still, we're still in recovery, and we're not quite there yet. And I think everybody thought we were going to start this school year and it was going to be just like a brand new school year, like any year, but it hasn't been. And so I think grace continues to be important for us. My last star that I will share, because I don't like to spend a lot of time in the negative part, is that we we've implemented some mental health or student well-being training for all of our certificated staff. And it's been really good. Like it's been something that we have wanted for a long time, but it's really been good content to start getting people to think about stigma, to start thinking about equity, to start thinking about what they do and how they do it in their classroom and how much that matters. So those are some things I'm proud of. As far as next steps, Terry, go ahead.
I'm just really proud of, I have held back a little bit this fall and really tried to listen to the conversations and how people are approaching things. And I'm just really proud and pleased of the development of our people and the conversations that they're having. I think it's a high level conversations. They're taking on some very tough topics and tough issues. And like Carrie said, leaning back into systems. And it's just amazing to watch people who know and have tools and have systems available to them so they can sit down and problem solve situations and keep things moving forward. And so it's tough work, and it's been a tough time to do this work, but it's truly amazing to listen to some of the conversations. And like I said earlier, the next steps, we just see ourselves continuing to improve. We're a continuous improvement philosophy. So we're just going to keep moving forward. As things come up, we'll talk about them and try to make, that figure out what our next steps is for that, and keep moving forward with our systems. So.
Well, please join me. There are resources here, and Tricia has done a nice job linking them in Pathables as well. We invite you to complete the evaluation, but please join me in thanking our presenters today. As promised, they were wonderful, and we're getting a lot of positive feedback in chat about what an important conversation. And I often think, I've hear over and over, this is a really hard year, and I'm kind of shifting my thinking. I think it might be one of our most important years to really get ourselves where we want to be, and it's giving us time to reflect. So thanks for leaving us, and I invite participants to think of the one tip from everything that you heard that you'll write down and take back and share with your school teams or district teams. Thanks so much, and please don't forget to fill out the evaluation.